You are listening to the Pregnancy Podcast with Vanessa Merton. Today's episode, we're talking about home birth, which of course means welcoming your baby in your own space with the freedom to labor however feels right for you. This is also the birth setting that raises the most questions and concerns because safety is a central issue. And we'll take that debate seriously. We'll dig into the research on safety and outcomes, including we'll talk about where the evidence is strong, where it's contested, and the conditions that really make the biggest difference. I'll also walk through what a home birth actually involves, who provides care, and how to prepare your space so that you know what happens from early labor through your first days postpartum. Whether you are curious about a home birth, weighing it against a hospital or a birth center, or you simply want to understand all of your options, this episode will give you the full picture so that you can make an informed and confident decision. You can see all of the resources and the full article for this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/homebirth. Safety is the central question when it comes to home birth, and there's a lot of strong opinions, but not always a clear look at the research. Today's episode really digs into different studies and will look at what the evidence actually says. Pregnancy Podcast Premium members get hundreds of episodes like this one with evidence-based information that's not available anywhere else. Plus, every episode, including new episodes out every week, are all ad-free. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/premium. VTech is the #1 baby monitor brand in North America and trusted by millions of families. If you want high-resolution video and a complete view of your baby's room, the VTech RM7968 has 4K video, a 7-inch parent unit, 360-degree pan, tilt, and zoom. It's available at Target, and you can check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/VTech. 8 Sheep Organics makes amazing 100% clean natural pregnancy products. From skincare to treating common pregnancy symptoms like stretch marks with clinically proven ingredients, 8 Sheep has you covered. Every product comes with a 100-day happiness guarantee. Try it risk-free, and if you're not 100% happy with your purchase, simply send them an email and they'll get you a refund, no questions asked. Check out 8 Sheep Organics and save 10% when you go to pregnancypodcast.com/8sheep. AG1 is the daily health drink that combines your multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants into one simple green scoop. It's one of the easiest things you can do to support your body every day. Head to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast, and when you first subscribe to AG1, you'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of vitamin D3K2, and you'll get to try each new flavor of AG1. Go to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. A home birth is exactly what it sounds like. You labor and birth in your own home rather than traveling to a hospital or a birth center. A midwife is the provider that gives your prenatal care, that attends your birth, and that cares for you and your baby in the hours and days afterwards. Instead of adapting to an institution's environment and routines, you get to give birth in a space that's already familiar and that's yours. It's worth being really clear on what a home birth is not. Obviously, your house does not have the medical capability that a hospital does. There's no operating room. A cesarean is not possible. There's no anesthesiologist, so you cannot get an epidural. And there's no newborn intensive care unit. So if your baby needed additional care after birth, they would have to transfer. These are not shortcomings. This is the nature of the setting. A home birth is designed for healthy, low-risk pregnancies and for births that are really expected to be straightforward without any complications. In a home birth, you're relying on the expertise of a midwife to guide you through labor and to direct you to alternative care if that becomes necessary. This episode is about planned attended home birth, and that's an important distinction. An attended home birth means that a trained professional, which is almost always a midwife, is present and providing care. An unattended home birth, sometimes called a free birth, is one in which there's no trained provider present. There's also a separate category of unplanned home births, where someone intended to give birth at a hospital or somewhere else, but then labor moved too quickly. Free births and unplanned home births carry very different risks. And lumping them together with planned home births that have midwives that are attending can make statistics confusing. So as we talk about home birth, we're really referring to a planned home birth attended by a qualified midwife. Because a home birth is intended for healthy, low-risk pregnancies, eligibility is important. There's not a single universal definition of low risk, and that exact criteria may vary by midwife or by state, but generally you're a candidate if you are pregnant with a single baby who is head down, you go into labor between 37 and 42 weeks, and you do not have any significant medical complications. There are some conditions that would move your pregnancy out of the low risk category. That would be something like high blood pressure, gestational diabetes. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists also considers a breech, or a baby that's not in a head-down position, or if you have twins or multiples, or a previous cesarean, to be absolute reasons not to plan a home birth. So if any of those apply to you, you may not be a great candidate. Home birth really accounts for a small share of births in the United States, but this is a growing number. About 98% of births happen in hospitals. The remaining 2%, sometimes those are referred to as community births, are split between home birth and freestanding birth centers. Home births were on the rise with the COVID-19 pandemic. Hospital policies got a little bit crazy during that time, and a lot of families were seeking alternatives. In 2023, which is the most recent year that data is available, there were almost 47,000 home births, which accounts for about 1.3% of all births in the United States. Although home births account for a very small number today, this wasn't always the case. A century ago, almost all births happened at home. And over the past 100 years, birth shifted to the hospital. And of course, that was driven by medical advances, but also affected by insurance coverage, state laws, provider training, and social attitudes that really shifted births to a hospital setting. In many other high-income countries, home birth is more common and it's more integrated into the health system. And as we talk about the research, you'll see why that integration into the broader health system is really important. There's a few defining features that really set home birth apart from a hospital or a birth center, and understanding these up front will put a lot of things in context. The most obvious difference is the setting itself. You're not packing a bag, you're not driving anywhere, you're not adjusting to an unfamiliar room. You're laboring in your own space with your own bed, your own bathroom, and everything that you own is easily accessible. The environment that you labor in really affects how labor unfolds. And that's because oxytocin, which is the hormone that drives contractions, flows most easily when you feel calm and safe. A home birth, like a birth center birth, is built on the midwifery model of care. And this is quite different from a hospital birth that's led by an obstetrician. The midwife-led model treats pregnancy and birth as normal physiologic events rather than medical conditions that need to be managed. So in practice, that means longer prenatal appointments. It means more time for education, a bigger emphasis on shared decision-making, and a lot of attention on allowing labor to unfold with minimal intervention. Having your baby at home also means that you're laboring without pain medication. A home birth is a low intervention and an unmedicated birth. An epidural or other medical pain relief options are not available. And for many parents that choose this setting, that's part of the appeal because it really reflects the kind of birth that they want. A big bonus of having a home birth is that you have full control over your environment, which also means that you decide who gets to be there. So there's no visitor policy that you have to adhere to. The last point I want to bring up here is that a home birth is not an island, meaning a good home birth midwife maintains relationships with physicians and with one or more nearby hospitals, so that if you need care beyond what a home birth can provide or what your midwife can provide for you, there is a clear path to transfer your care. And the strength of that connection is really important for safety. When we're talking about midwives, there's 3 midwife credentials in the United States, and they differ in training and where they can practice. You have a certified nurse midwife. This is someone who is a registered nurse and then completes graduate level training in midwifery. CNMs are the most common. They are licensed in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And in addition to attending home births, they also practice in hospitals and birth centers. Then you have a certified midwife. This is someone who has a background in a health field other than nursing and then completes a graduate level midwifery program. Certified midwives meet the same core competencies that certified nurse midwives meet. They take the same national board exam. The difference is that they are not also nurses. Certified midwives are currently recognized in about a dozen states, plus the District of Columbia. Then you have certified professional midwives. This is somebody that is a direct entry midwife, trained specifically for out-of-hospital birth. Certified professional midwives are licensed in 37 states plus the District of Columbia. The United States has no federal law that governs midwifery. Each state sets its own rules, which means that the midwife that would attend your home birth really depends on the laws in your state. The midwifery model isn't just a credential, it's really a whole approach to care. It emphasizes continuity of care, meaning that you are building a relationship with the same provider throughout your pregnancy, your birth, postpartum. A Cochrane review comparing midwife-led continuity of care with other care models found that people receiving midwife-led continuity of care were less likely to have a cesarean or an instrumental birth, more likely to have a spontaneous vaginal birth, and more likely to report a positive experience. A home birth is one of the settings where that model is most fully put into practice. Because choosing the right midwife is such an important decision when you're planning a home birth, it really helps to come to an interview with specific questions. You don't have to write these down. All of this is in the article for this episode. A few questions that are worth asking are, first, what are your credentials and what's your training? I would ask how long they have been attending home births and roughly how many they have attended. A good question is, what is your hospital transfer rate? That will tell you how often they're transferring patients to a hospital setting. I would also ask, what are the most common reasons that you transfer patients? You should also know what hospital you would transfer to and whether that midwife has a relationship with obstetricians there. Another great question is, what complications are you trained and equipped to handle at home? You should know who else would be at the birth, if they have a midwife in training that would attend or a doula they regularly work with. And as you ask these questions, you're listening for a midwife that's experienced, that is honest about the risks, and that has a very clear backup plan. I encourage you to explore your options and interview more than one midwife in your area. That's going to give you a much better idea of what's out there. The good news is that a home birth generally costs less than a hospital or a birth center. The bad news is that it may not be covered by insurance. Coverage for home birth is much less consistent and much more difficult to navigate than if you're having your baby at a hospital. Whether it's covered, how much of it's covered, depends on a lot of things: your specific plan, your state, the credentials of your midwife. Some families pay out of pocket for a home birth and find that it's still less than their share of a hospital birth with insurance. The best approach is really to call your insurance company directly and ask specific questions. Trying to track this information down online is pretty difficult, and it's often easier to just get on the phone. I would also, while you're on the phone with your insurance company, ask them how coverage would work if you transfer to a hospital. Navigating how much your birth is going to cost, what your insurance covers, is very confusing. And of course, there is a whole episode that covers that in detail. Let's talk about what to expect with your prenatal care for a home birth. The content of your prenatal care really doesn't change too much depending on where you're having your baby. There are a few differences with a home birth. First, appointments with midwives are typically longer than a standard appointment with an obstetrician. More of that time going to education, answering questions, really talking through your preferences and that shared decision making. Appointments may take place at your home, or they may take place at your midwife's office. One thing that's happening throughout your prenatal care is ongoing risk screening. Your midwife is continually confirming that you are still a good candidate for a home birth. If a complication comes up, depending on what it is, you may need to add an obstetrician to your prenatal care, or even potentially move your planned birth to a hospital. And this screening is really a big part of what makes home birth safe for the people that do it. Of course, preparing for a home birth is going to involve some things that you wouldn't even have to think about if you were having your baby at a hospital or a birth center. Your midwife has all of the clinical equipment, including things to monitor you and your baby, to manage the birth, to handle common complications, but they're going to give you a list of what to have on hand. It's going to be some basic supplies and some things for easy cleanup. This could include protective coverings for things like your bed, the floor, furniture. This would be like plastic sheeting, a shower curtain, towels, large disposable pads. Then, of course, you need to think about the space that you're going to be laboring in, which rooms in your house, and whether you want comfort tools available. Things like a birthing ball or pillows. And if you're planning a water birth, you will need access to a deep tub. If you have one at your house already, then that may be taken care of. Otherwise, you may need a birth pool and some additional supplies. Although a birth bag is not required if you're not going anywhere, it's not a bad idea to have a bag packed in the event that you needed to transfer to a hospital. You would just pack that the same way that you would for a planned hospital birth, so that if you ended up needing to transfer, you're not having to gather things during labor. A home birth is an unmedicated birth, so there's no epidural and no other medical pain relief options. This means that you will rely on non-medical comfort measures. This could include a lot of things: movement, position changes, water immersion in a tub or a pool, breathing and relaxation techniques, counter pressure and massage, continuous support from your partner, a doula potentially, and of course your midwife. These are real evidence-based tools. And there is a full episode on non-medical pain management options. Because pain medication is not an option, preparation is not optional. One of the most common reasons that an unmedicated birth does not go the way someone hoped is simply that they did not prepare for it. I highly recommend that you take a childbirth class focused on unmedicated birth. A doula can also be incredibly helpful, and your own education, listening to episodes of the Pregnancy Podcast. All of these things will help you build a toolkit for coping with contractions. It's also important to understand what choosing a home birth means if you change your mind. If you decide during labor that you want an epidural, that would require transferring to a hospital. You cannot change your decision about that and remain at home. There's also a few other interventions that are not part of home birth care. Routine labor induction or augmentation with a Pitocin drip is not done at home. That calls for continuous monitoring, which is not available. Midwives don't use Pitocin to induce labor at home, but many do carry that to manage postpartum bleeding if it is necessary. You also would not have access to an assisted vaginal delivery, meaning the use of forceps or a vacuum. If any of those are needed, a hospital transfer would be required. The takeaway here is not that these interventions are bad. It's that a home birth is a specific choice for a specific kind of birth. And going into it with a clear understanding of what is and what is not available makes it work the way that it's supposed to. Let's talk about going into labor at home. You and your midwife should discuss when they will come to you during labor. Typically, a midwife is on call. That means that as soon as you're starting to see signs of labor, you should give them a heads up. Some midwives may head over early and then stay, of course, for the whole labor. Others may wait until labor is more established. Once you're in labor, once your midwife is with you at your home, they will monitor you and your baby to ensure that labor is progressing well. Rather than using continuous electronic monitoring, home birth midwives use intermittent fetal heart rate monitoring. So they listen to your baby's heartbeat at regular intervals with a handheld Doppler. And for low-risk labors, the research supports this approach. A home setting gives you a lot of freedom in how you labor. You can move freely, you can change positions, and you can be anywhere you want, whether that's your bedroom, a bathtub, the shower, pacing up and down the hallways. Research consistently shows that movement helps. And a Cochrane review of women in the first stage of labor found that walking in upright positions reduced the length of labor, the risk of cesarean, and the need for an epidural with no apparent downside for mothers or babies. You can also eat and drink freely during your labor at home. That's encouraged typically by midwives because labor is hard physical work and you need to stay hydrated and you need fuel. So your midwife is your key support person, but home births frequently involve other participants. Many parents, of course, have their partner present. You may also include another family member, a friend, a doula. Your midwife is really monitoring you and your baby so they can be fully present to make sure that everybody is doing well. A lot of that hands-on labor support may come from other sources, like your partner, your doula, or anyone else that you've chosen to be there. Then we get to the birth. Midwives don't have the same strict policies and procedures that are in place in a hospital or even at a birth center, so you have more flexibility in how you give birth. If you're planning a water birth, a home setting like a birth center gives you the freedom to stay in the water for an actual birth. ACOG supports water immersion during the first stage of labor as a comfort measure, but it does not support spending the pushing stage in water. So even if a hospital has birth tubs available, they typically do not allow people to stay in there for the second stage of labor. Overall, the midwifery community is more supportive of birth in the water. Once your baby arrives, this is one of the parts where I think home birth really shines. There's no rush. There's no transferring to a postpartum room. There's no flow of staff in and out of the room, you really have an opportunity to quietly settle in with your baby in your own bed. Unless there's a reason to do otherwise, your baby will go skin to skin on your chest immediately. That supports their temperature, breathing, blood sugar. It lowers stress in both you and your baby. The umbilical cord is typically left intact for delayed cord clamping, and your partner can cut the cord if they'd like to do that. And then your midwife will support you through the third stage of labor. That's the delivery of the placenta. If there was a tear to your perineum, that's something that they could also repair. The same newborn procedures that are offered at a hospital are also pretty much part of a home birth. What tends to differ is the timing. Your midwife will, of course, check your baby's well-being in those first few minutes, including giving them an APGAR score. Midwives really prioritize the golden hour. That's the first hour after your birth, so they'll try to delay procedures like weighing and measuring and allow you to really just be skin to skin with your baby. There are some standard procedures in the United States for newborns, like vitamin K injections and erythromycin eye ointment. Both of those have their own pros and cons. There are separate episodes that dig into the evidence on those. Parents who choose a home birth are more likely to opt out of these procedures, but that's not because they're not available. It just tends to be that parents who are choosing a low intervention home birth also tend to skew more low intervention with their newborns. There are a couple of newborn screenings that come with extra logistics if you give birth at home. So the heel prick blood test that checks for rare genetic and metabolic conditions, and the newborn hearing screen are both part of standard newborn care in the United States. That heel prick may be done at home by your midwife. It may be done at a follow-up visit. The hearing screen often needs to be done elsewhere. It's unlikely that your midwife has the equipment to take care of that. And your midwife will give you instructions for any screening that's not available through them. Because your baby is not born in a hospital, you need to ensure that they are seen by a pediatrician typically within the first few days after birth. And you should have a pediatrician lined up well before your due date. With a home birth, you skip the whole discharge process. You don't have a car ride to get home, and you're recovering in your own bed. Before your midwife leaves, they will ensure that you and your baby are both stable and doing well. They're going to help you get settled. They'll talk you through what to watch for. This is a conversation that it helps to have your partner or another support person present for. And then the midwifery model also tends to include more postpartum follow-up than a typical OBGYN practice. Many home birth midwives do a home visit in the first few days and then see you more often over the following weeks than an OBGYN does. Now that we have covered a lot about home birth and what you can expect from your prenatal care through having your baby, we have to talk about the evidence on safety and outcomes. Before we do that, I would like to thank the sponsors that have supported this episode. A lot of companies offer exclusive discounts for pregnancy podcast listeners, and you can always find discounts and promo codes at pregnancypodcast.com/resources. A baby monitor is one of those things that you will rely on multiple times a day for years. And that makes it worth getting a model that delivers clear video, has solid night vision, and room coverage that actually reaches every corner. The VTech RM7968 video baby monitor is built exactly for that. It comes with 2 cameras. So you could potentially watch 2 rooms on a split screen, or you can get 2 angles in the same room. The cameras deliver 4K ultra high definition video to your phone, tablet, or the 7-inch color LCD parent unit. And it has 360-degree pan, tilt, and zoom so that you can see every corner of the room. This monitor will give you a clear view, even in a dark room. It's got a touch adaptive multicolored night light that automatically adjusts to the room, and a temperature sensor so you can keep track of the temperature in your baby's nursery. You'll also get two-way talk, soothing sounds and lullabies, and free live remote access through your phone or tablet with no subscription fees. VTech is the #1 baby monitor brand in North America, and they're trusted by millions of families. The VTech RM7968 is available at Target. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/VTech. AG1 is the daily health drink that combines your multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants into one simple green scoop. It's one of the easiest things you can do to support your body every day. AG1 goes to great lengths to continually invest in rigorous peer-reviewed clinical trials. And you know how much I love research. AG1 also goes above and beyond to test for hundreds of contaminants and impurities to guarantee that they deliver the highest quality nutrients available. I've been starting every morning with AG1 for years. I love the peace of mind because I know that I'm covering all the key nutrients that my body needs, plus supporting my microbiome, metabolism, and immune system. Head to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast, and when you first subscribe to AG1, you'll get an AG1 welcome kit, a bottle of vitamin D3K2, and you'll get to try each new flavor of AG1. Go to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. As a friendly reminder, pregnant or nursing women should seek professional medical advice before taking this or any other dietary supplement. Let's get back to today's episode. Safety is the #1 question about home birth. And a lot of people will tell you that they couldn't imagine why anybody would give birth at any other place other than a hospital. Let's really examine the research on safety. I want to start with 2 limitations that we see in research. First, the gold standard of research is a randomized controlled trial. And that's where participants are randomly assigned to one group or another. That kind of study does not exist for home birth because no one would be willing to have the location of their birth decided by chance. So that means nearly all home birth research is observational, meaning that it compares outcomes after the fact, and observational studies cannot control for everything. Secondly, some data lumps together all home births. Remember in the beginning of this episode, I talked about home births that were unplanned or unattended so that there was no midwife present. These carry very different risks, and including them in statistics makes the setting appear more dangerous than a planned attended home birth actually is. The strongest research carefully studies planned home births with a qualified provider, and that's really what we will be looking at. First, where the research agrees. Across virtually every study, planned home births involve far fewer interventions than hospital births. Women who plan a home birth have lower rates of epidural use, continuous electronic fetal monitoring, episiotomy, instrumental delivery, and cesarean birth. Of course, these are interventions that are not available at home, so it's not a surprise that the rates are low. Women who plan a home birth also tend to have fewer severe perineal tears, fewer infections, and less postpartum hemorrhage. They also consistently report higher satisfaction with their birth experience. None of this is seriously disputed. The debate is not about interventions or satisfaction. The debate is really about newborn safety. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has a committee opinion on planned home birth. This was first issued in 2017 and reaffirmed in 2023. It states that while ACOG believes hospitals and accredited birth centers are the safest settings for birth, it respects a woman's right to make a medically informed decision about delivery. It's not a surprise that ACOG is not a big advocate of home birth because ACOG is an organization that's centered around the hospital model of care. ACOG's position is that planned home birth is associated with about a twofold increase of perinatal death compared with a planned hospital birth, though it notes that the absolute risk remains low. In this opinion, ACOG also talks about what they consider a contraindication to home birth. That would be a baby that is not in a head-down position, twins or multiples, a previous cesarean. They also state that several factors are critical to good outcomes, including appropriate selection of low-risk candidates, a certified midwife or physician practicing within an integrated and regulated health system, ready access to consultation, and safe and timely transport to a nearby hospital. A lot of ACOG's position really traces back to a 2010 meta-analysis that combined results from several studies and found that the overall newborn death rate was roughly twice as high in planned home births as in planned hospital births. It's important to understand a few terms as we're talking about this study. Perinatal death generally refers to stillbirths and deaths within the first week of life. Neonatal death refers to deaths in the first 4 weeks. The 2010 meta-analysis found its difference specifically in neonatal death. And that meta-analysis was controversial in the research and in the midwifery communities. The criticism raised concerns about which studies were included and excluded. In particular, there was data from a very large study in the Netherlands where home birth is well integrated and outcomes are strong, and that was excluded from the key neonatal mortality calculation. So critics argued that including that would have substantially reduced the difference reported in the meta-analysis. I'm not weighing in on who's right or wrong here. I just want you to understand that the evidence on which ACOG's position rests has been contested. So there is a large body of research, a lot of it very recent, finding that for low-risk pregnancies with a qualified provider and a solid system, that planned home birth outcomes are comparable to other settings. The Netherlands study is the classic example. In the Netherlands, home birth is fully integrated into maternity care. So a study of more than 743,000 women found no increase of adverse perinatal outcomes for planned home births among low-risk women. The authors were careful to note that their results may apply specifically to regions where home birth is well integrated. Some of the most useful evidence for families in the United States is a 2024 study. This is the largest study to date comparing low-risk planned home births with low-risk planned birth center births. Using 2 large national community birth registries with about 50,000 births in one and 63,000 in the other, the researchers found that outcomes from planned home births were comparable to outcomes from a planned birth center birth. And that was across a wide range of measures, including maternal and neonatal hospitalization, hemorrhage, NICU admission, and perinatal death. They found no observable difference in intrapartum or neonatal death between the 2 settings, and planned home births actually had lower rates of transfer to a hospital. In the episode we did on birth centers, we talked about a lot of the evidence showing that birth centers are a safe option for low-risk pregnancies, and this study indicates that for someone who is low risk, a planned home birth performs comparably. There's a couple of large reviews that really add to the research here. A meta-analysis of neonatal outcomes covering roughly 500,000 intended home births found no increase in perinatal or neonatal mortality or morbidity when birth was planned at home compared to a hospital. And again, of course, we are talking about low-risk women. A companion review of maternal outcomes found that low-risk women who intended to give birth at home had fewer interventions and fewer adverse maternal outcomes. A Cochrane review comparing planned hospital birth with a planned home birth concluded that the evidence suggests planned hospital birth does not reduce mortality, but may lead to more interventions and complications, and that low-risk women could reasonably plan a home birth in a well-organized health system. So I know we've talked about a lot here, and it may still feel like the research contradicts itself a little bit. The way to reconcile this is to really look at the conditions. Home birth outcomes are strongest under a specific set of conditions. So we're talking low-risk pregnancy, that you have a qualified and skilled provider present, and in a health system where home birth is integrated rather than on the fringe, and that's so that there is a clear, rapid plan for transfer. Outcomes are the weakest when those conditions are missing. For example, when higher risk pregnancies are managed at home, when the provider is not well qualified or the provider is absent, or when transfer is slow or it is just coordinated poorly. The US is more fragmented than countries like the Netherlands, which is part of why the US data looks less reassuring. Practical message here is not that home birth is simply safe or unsafe. It's that the conditions around the birth matter. And those conditions are largely within your control. You want to choose a provider that is well qualified. You want to have a plan in place. And one of the things that makes home birth a safer option is having a solid backup plan in place. You'll have to understand if you are planning a home birth, there is always the possibility that you will need to transfer to a hospital. That's not something to gloss over, and you have to be realistic about that so that you can plan for it. It may be helpful to understand what a transfer actually looks like, because it's rarely what people picture. Most transfers are not 911 emergency calls. Far more often, it's happening because labor's not progressing, because someone decided that they wanted pain relief that was not available at a home setting, or because a midwife caught an early sign that a hospital venue would be a safer option. Transfers usually take place well before anything becomes urgent. That being said, of course, emergencies do happen, and a small share of transfers are urgent, but that is the minority. Also, keep in mind a transfer is not a failure, and it doesn't mean that an emergency cesarean is the obvious next step. Many women who transfer during labor still go on to have a vaginal birth at the hospital. One other thing I want to address is that having a backup plan is not a sign of pessimism or doubt. When you have a solid backup plan, you're going into your birth more confident because you're prepared to navigate any scenario. Really, the foundation of that backup plan is a very in-depth conversation with your midwife well ahead of when you go into labor. You want to know exactly what a hospital transfer would entail. You should ask your midwife if they have an established relationship with an obstetrician or a hospital. You want to find out which hospital you would transfer to and ask what happens to your midwife's role in the event that you transfer. Depending on where you live, some midwives can continue with you in a support capacity, so they may go to more of a doula role. Others may have to completely hand over your care and step away. Also, how close the nearest hospital is a consideration that's important as you're choosing a home birth. And that's because fast, well-coordinated access to a hospital is one of the conditions that is most strongly tied to good outcomes. It's important to know that there are aspects of labor and birth that you cannot control. And that's why you're working with a professional who's going to ensure that everything is going smoothly, or to catch it if it's not. If you require a transfer to a hospital, it's not a failure. That's a feature of having good care and ensuring that you and your baby stay safe. A birth at home really requires more planning than a birth in other settings. And the best tool to prepare for that is to make an actual birth plan. You know that I'm a massive advocate for creating a birth plan. The real value in this is really the process and the exercise of creating your birth plan than it is the printed page that you end up with. The Pregnancy Podcast has a lot of resources to help you create your birth plan. I will link to all of those in the article for this episode. Because a hospital transfer is always a possibility, I highly recommend that you create a separate backup plan specifically for a hospital transfer. That would be a completely separate document. In creating it, you would go through the same process that you create your primary birth plan, and that will walk you through all of your options for every scenario. Hopefully, you don't need it, but if you do, you've already gone through your options, you know what you want, and you can make confident, informed decisions rather than panicking and making uninformed decisions under pressure. No matter where you give birth, the most important relationship that you have is with your care provider. And for a home birth, that relationship is especially central. The midwifery model is really built around continuity of care. So your midwife is going to be one person who's with you from your first prenatal appointment through your birth and into your postpartum recovery. Use your prenatal appointments, especially because the appointments with a midwife tend to be longer. Really work through all the details. Ask every question that comes up, talk through your preferences, and really work through creating your birth plan and your backup plan. The more aligned that you and your provider are well before you go into labor, the closer you will get to your desired birth experience. A home birth is not the right choice for every pregnancy, but for a healthy, low-risk pregnancy with a qualified midwife, a solid backup plan, and good access to a hospital, it's a reasonable option, and one that a growing number of expecting parents are choosing. The goal of this episode is really for you to understand your options and evaluate home birth on the evidence. If you're drawn to a home birth, I encourage you to dig into the research. There are a pile of studies linked in the article for this episode, and interview midwives in your area. Ask questions about safety and backup planning so you can get a better idea of your options. This episode is the third of 3 on birth venues. There were separate episodes on what to expect from a hospital birth and a birth center. So together, I wanted these 3 episodes to really give you the full landscape. The best birth is the one where you feel informed, supported, and matched to the right venue for your pregnancy and your preferences. There's not one place that's universally right or wrong, and exploring all 3 is really the best way to get confident in wherever you choose to welcome your baby. We covered a lot in today's episode. We talked all about home birth, talked about what makes a home birth distinct, and the midwifery model of care, how that compares to working with a typical OBGYN. We walked through what you can expect from your prenatal care to labor to birth and postpartum with a home birth experience. We talked about pain management options. Of course, an epidural is not available if you're having your baby at home. And we really spent a lot of time digging into the research on safety. That's the number one question about home birth, and probably the biggest reason that most people would not consider it because they don't think that it's safe. And we spent a lot of time talking about the reality of a hospital transfer. And that's not to discourage you in any way from choosing a home birth if that's something you're considering. It's just so that you are fully prepared and you can go into your birth with confidence. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the Pregnancy Podcast today. I hope that you find this episode helpful. Please share the Pregnancy Podcast if you have a friend that's pregnant. So many listeners discover the podcast through personal recommendations, and I appreciate you sharing it. As always, you can reach me, Vanessa, at pregnancypodcast.com. You can read the full article and all of the resources that accompany this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/homebirth. Whether you're considering a home birth or just want to understand every option available, there's hundreds of premium episodes that go just as deep as this one and really dig into the research, covering everything from birth prep to postpartum recovery to all the symptoms that can come up during pregnancy. Plus, it's all ad-free. Check out Pregnancy Podcast Premium at pregnancypodcast.com/premium.